Hello, you're watching the business headlines on HW News with me, Ali Azhar. In what could have been a very beneficial agreement for Mukesh Ambani-led Reliance Industries, I'm referring to the sale of a minority stake in his refinery business to the world's largest company, Saudi Aramco. That has stalled. The deal hit a roadblock over valuation differences and the fact that Aramco has cited concerns over RIL's intention to transfer some of its debt to the refinery business ahead of the transaction. I mentioned beneficial earlier because if this deal went through, the proceeds of the transaction would go a long way in helping RIL reduce its massive debt that has ballooned to about $42 billion as of June 30th, which is about 2.88 trillion rupees. Because when you make a deal with the Saudis, you know there's some serious money involved. In April of this year, when the proposed transaction between the two oil-producing giants was first made public, we reported it. Just to give you a quick recap on how the deal was expected to be structured, well, here it is. Reliance, from its entire oil and gas business, would carve out its downstream refining and petrochemical businesses into a separate entity, which was expected to be valued somewhere between 55 to 60 billion dollars. That's roughly 4,20,000 crore rupees. Revenue-wise too, the downstream business contributes the lion's share to Reliance's entire oil and gas business. Aramco was reportedly negotiating for a 25% stake in this standalone downstream vertical for around 10 to 15 billion dollars, which is about 1,05,000 crores, taking the upper end. Reliance, in the last couple of years, has been making an effort to minimize its investments in the oil and gas business and concentrate further on its retail and telecom businesses, which provide it with a much higher profit margin. However, in doing so, it has made massive investments and, in the bargain, undertaken massive amounts of debt. To pay some of this debt, RIL has been selling assets. Last week, it entered into an agreement with Brookfield Asset Management to sell stake in an investment trust that manages mobile phone and fiber assets for 25,000 crores. Earlier this year, the same firm, Brookfield, agreed to purchase the East-West pipeline from Reliance for 13,000 crores. Therefore, if RIL managed to monetize part of its refinery business, it would have breathed a sigh of relief. Also, this would be its biggest sale as yet, with proceeds in excess of 1 lakh crore rupees expected. However, the sticking point was valuation. While Aramco may have settled for the $60 billion valuation as mentioned earlier, Reliance may have been looking for a higher one, somewhere in the range of $70 billion. In the past, a number of brokerage houses have valued the downstream oil and gas business of RIL at close to 70 billion. Besides, even the transfer of debt to a special purpose vehicle or an SPV before the transaction was to take place proved to be a damper. However, Reliance is said to be working on an alternative plan and negotiations could still resume and lead to a compromise in the coming months. Acharya, Deputy Governor, well, as of Tuesday, ex-Deputy Governor of the RBI, who resigned and ended his stint a few months earlier than expected, had a final hard-hitting message for his colleagues and those in the government. It is widely believed that Mr. Acharya, who, like the former governor of the RBI, Urjit Patel, resigned as the Modi-led BJP government was continually infringing on the central bank's autonomy and attempting to dictate terms to it. Just like the US, where Donald Trump has been continuously pressurizing the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates, it has become a common phenomenon to see autocratic leaders trying to enforce their will on central banks. Acharya, who is known as a man that does not mince his words, had one last message for the government before he returns to his teaching career in the US. He said that the Indian economy risks crowding out of private borrowings due to high government borrowings. He said that the government would be borrowing in excess of 7 lakh crore rupees to cover its fiscal deficit position, which is pegged to be 3.3% of GDP. Further, it will also raise extra budgetary resources by borrowing indirectly through public sector enterprises. The risk of so much government borrowings is that it comes at the cost of private borrowing. Also, such borrowings could keep interest rates high and worse, could render monetary policy actions ineffective by interfering with monetary policy transmission. No wonder, in spite of interest rate cuts in the last 3 monetary policy meetings, we are not seeing any banks cut borrowing rates, and neither are home loan or car loan EMIs becoming any less. He explained that since the government has such a high borrowing, the limited banking resources that remain first go towards larger, higher rated corporates, and therefore it is the small and medium-sized enterprises that are worst impacted. He suggested that the government can reduce its dependence on borrowings by displaying some fiscal discipline. Large farm loan waivers, welfare programs, unnecessary subsidies, and other measures of populist spending the government embarked on prior to elections only add to the fiscal strain and come at the cost of investment, which is at a multi-year low currently. He also suggested further divestment in public sector enterprises. We now tune in to our business and finance editor, Mr. Akhilesh Bhargav, to see what he makes of the situation. Over to you, sir.
Any entity which lives beyond its means, in other words, which spends more than what it earns, finally needs to resort to borrowings. And that is the case with the government of India also. The excess spending of the government of India is called the fiscal deficit, and that is the amount that the government needs to borrow in order to spend. As per this year's budget, the fiscal deficit, which represents the borrowings that the government will undertake, is to the tune of 7,10,000 crores. Now, what happens is that when the government borrows, it sucks away all the liquidity out of the market, particularly in these times when bankers, NBFCs are more happy lending to the government than lending to any other entity because of the high risk of default. So the government crowds the markets, takes the liquidity away, denying much needed funds for every other sector of the economy. That is a matter of concern. And this is what Viral Acharya pointed out in his recent speeches at IIM Ahmedabad and IIT Mumbai. This was, of course, a kind of his favorite speech. He has given up being the deputy governor of the RBI. But this borrowing by the government, crowding the local domestic markets and denying others the funds that they need is a matter of concern. To us, the bigger matter of concern lies in the fact that the government has been doctoring its fiscal deficit by resorting to borrowings by other government entities. So the government does not borrow, but the Food Corporation of India borrows, and it meets the food deficit bill of the government of India. And the borrowings of Food Corporation of India have been about 1 lakh crores. If you were to add that to the government borrowings, which is what it is, the entire scene of fiscal deficit and government borrowings, and the amount that the government crowds the market would go in a very different and more adverse direction. Last year, the government resorted to this kind of borrowings to the tune of about a 1.5 lakh crores, and this year they are estimating these kind of measures would only add to the government borrowings, would only add to the amount that the government takes away from the domestic capital markets, and to that extent, it would deny other deserving borrowers of what they need for their investment needs and their funding needs.
Thank you for watching HW News. This is me signing off. Have a great day.
HW News Network today is a year and a half old. Thanks to your support, thanks to your love, we've grown. We require your support a little more. What we request you to do is to download our free app. Our app is in Hindi, English and Marathi. We promise to update you with the latest news, views, analysis, interview. We also have a live TV going in that. If you download our app, we will get advertisers. And if we get advertisers, we'll get revenue. We get revenue, we can serve you better. So once again, please do support us. Please download our app. Namaskar.